So Northern Ireland has a dysfunctional economy. I would call it an extractive economy. Some people would call this government not a democracy or a plutocracy, but a kleptocracy. In other words, we're taking and taking and taking from this place. We're taking from the land, the soils, the air, the water, and we're leaving nothing in return except a wasteland. Around Northern Ireland, we've seen the proliferation of lots of mining projects and quarrying projects. Obviously, one of the biggest projects that's coming to a head in the public inquiry for the Dalradian gold mine later this year. We've seen the industrial dredging of the bed of Lough Neagh. But there's a new front opening in Northern Ireland, a new front for the mining and quarrying industry. And it's a necklace of quarries that are burgeoning in and around the Greater Belfast area. So the impact of all these developments is the total industrialisation of the countryside. In my mind, that's not what the countryside is for. The countryside is to produce food, the countryside is for nature, the countryside is to provide green lungs for people who live in towns and cities. Instead, they're ransacking the countryside and they're not taking into account the impacts of all the developments.
The quarry doesn't make the best of neighbours, unfortunately. It is unusual, I suppose, to have an activity like that going on within the countryside.
We're ripping out the countryside, we're taking away the stone and gravel, we're no longer able to provide food in these fields, we're polluting the air with dust, we're causing huge explosions that are very frightening for people who live in the vicinity.
Whenever there's going to be a quarry blast, we would be given a warning between 1 hour to 30 minutes prior to the blasting. It's quite scary. It just feels your whole house shakes.
The lorries are not going into the countryside of Northern Ireland, they're going into Belfast Harbour, and this rock, this aggregate, is being exported all over the world. They're not supplying resources for the Northern Ireland building industry. We're an export hub now.
On their way to the docks, you know, they're passing by multiple schools and these large lorries. You know, it's not just the fact that there's diesel pollutants from these lorries, but what they have in the back is essentially rock, which is exceptionally dusty. And, you know, you have the silica dust from that.
The air pollution from all these lorries getting into Belfast has never been assessed. The cumulative impact of all these quarries has never been assessed.
We're very concerned about the lung damage that is potentially, that could happen to local residents nearby. You know, this is silica dust. Silicosis is a big issue.
Behind me here is a quarry in Bad Bridge. A stone's throw away is another equally huge quarry. This quarry behind me is subject to a planning application for another major extension. And this is where they're breaking the law because they're not assessing the impact of the existing operation with the one next door. So in terms of noise and dust and vibrations, and in terms of pollution and the loss of amenity for all the local people who are really concerned about what's happening here, none of that has been assessed.
The quarry that's currently there has had numerous extensions over the years. Now the plan is to extend it even further, and that would then extend the working life of it for another 30 years.
So one of these developments is bad enough. Imagine living beside one of these operations where they're stripping away the habitat, they're stripping away fields in a way that can never be replaced. This is irreparable damage to the countryside. You can't fix something like this. When this happens, it happens forever. That's why extractive industries are so dangerous.
It's got to the point that Northern Ireland has given enough. You know, this industry in this area has been going on a long time, and we just kind of are concerned as to when it's going to stop. When
you see a littering of these quarry operations in what I would describe as a necklace hanging around, almost like a noose around Belfast now, what they have to do is assess each one in combination with the one next door and the one next door to that. So if you look at air pollution, for example, there can be up to 50,000 lorry movements a year from some of these operations. They're going into the city centre, causing huge amount of pollution, and that needs to be looked at in terms of air pollution, in terms of the impact on the lungs of people who live in Belfast. So that's just one example where they're failing to take into account the totality of all the industrialised developments in and around Belfast. This is a new front that's opening up by the quarrying industry. They're an incredibly powerful lobby group. They're locked into high carbon concrete production for decades to come.
We very much feel that the materials that are being gained from the quarry are materials that can be the renewable materials we can get from elsewhere. We don't keep needing to dig these big holes in the ground to keep gaining this material. You know, this is material that can be recycled and reused elsewhere. We don't keep needing to take more and more because there's only so much the area can keep giving.
We've given away the country as a sacrifice zone to not just international mining companies, but local companies as well, who are doing huge business, profiting from the despoilation of the countryside.